I have never participated in any fantasy football league or game or anything in my life. So I need to be educated a little bit here. And who better to educate me and give you guys the insight than Mr. Andy Holloway, right? The Fantasy Footballers podcast host joins us now here on the Mercedes-Benz Vans phone line. Welcome to the show, Andy. How you doing?
Hey, Ryan. Appreciate you having me on. That blows my mind. I heard you telling your story about the softball home run derby, the competitive juices that you had going. How in the world have you not channeled that into fantasy football?
You know, when I was in the locker room in San Diego, they tried to get me in a NBA basketball fantasy football league, and I just or fantasy league, and I just I paid no attention to it, and I just looked every week to see how my players that I had picked. It just didn't interest me, and I think maybe I was turned off by it when I was leaving the stadium one time, and a guy like berated me up and down about how I destroyed his fantasy football day because of how poorly I played because he started me, and so I think that ultimately put me in the wrong direction.
Yeah, it has to be a little bit more complicated for players. I mean, we just talked to Austin Eckler on the show a couple of days ago, and he was saying how much he enjoyed the fantasy attention, but I was like, your 20 touchdowns probably had something to do with it.
Yeah, right? Okay, so speak to me like I'm a child right now and talk to me about what goes into your fantasy football lineup. How do you set it? How does the draft happen? Just talk to me like I'm a newborn, then you're teaching how to walk a little bit, all right?
Fantasy for dummies.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that people connect with so much on fantasy is how it just makes you a fan of every single team in the league. I mean, you can have a matchup on a Monday Night Football game between a couple of teams that are out of contention, and you can still have the 12 guys and gals from your league just going absolutely bonkers, rooting for one player that has a huge impact on your fantasy league. So, you know, the gist is you throw yourself into that pretend general manager role. You go and you have a draft that, if your league's worth anything, it's probably over the top, and you're mocking one another throughout the year, and ultimately one person gets to pretend they're the king of the world, and the rest of them live in their shame for another year, and it's just one of those things that makes football fun.
I've been asked a few times on the website Cameo to read off draft order. Also, I've been told many times that like the loser of many of these leagues get like a Ryan Leaf trophy. So I'm involved. I've been involved many years in this way. Tell me about the difference. Differential between the leagues, because my dad and his best friend have been doing this for years, but they just go by like their league is only about like touchdowns. Like if a guy gets touchdown points, it's not about how many receptions somebody has or carries or attempts or things like that. What are the difference between the leagues that have different kind of point systems when it comes down to it?
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty old school league, and that is how fantasy football really got started. But with the adaptation of so much technology and having your team in your pocket and the ability to not have to sit there and go through box scores in the newspaper and add everything up, we've seen the fantasy world grow quite a bit. You know, now a lot of people play in leagues that are point per reception. So if you catch a pass, you're getting a point. And we've seen a lot of variations of scoring in the years past. You know, leagues where you have quarterbacks that get 6 points or 4 points per touchdown. You get points taken away for fumbles and interceptions. And so the intricacy has grown, and the types of leagues have changed a lot over the years. There's a lot of leagues now that are called dynasty leagues where, you're keeping your roster for multiple years. You're not just doing one fresh draft at the beginning of every year. And it's kind of just different preferences for different people.
Wow. I mean, it seems like it's so intricate and deciding and rolling with it. You're about to kick off your year 2 of your podcast, and talk to us a little bit about what you're doing with Spotify there on August 24th.
Yeah, we're really excited about it. Our podcast has been going for a while. We do that every day, but the live show on Spotify Live, the Fantasy Footballers Party Room,
right,
is an opportunity for us to just come together once a week. We do it on Wednesdays at 6 Eastern, and we chat with the fans, and we answer every question possible, talk about every waiver wire pickup, every upcoming matchup, and the passion is real. Everybody in fantasy, I think, wants to make the prediction that turns out right so that they can tell everybody they did that. So, we have the opportunity to connect on Spotify Live. Fans can ask questions, and it's just a good time. That's why we call it the Party Room.
All right. So you're going to be my guru this year. All right. We're going to stay connected. I'm going to make sure I get your number. Who, if I were drafting, who are the top 5 players in fantasy right now that is a must-have?
Yeah. I think Jonathan Taylor sits at the very top of that list. Running back for the Colts, just a fantasy football force. I think Christian McCaffrey's still up there. Fantasy players have been bummed out with the injuries, but when he plays, he's great. You got a couple wideouts, Justin Jefferson, Cooper Kupp, who absolutely dominated last year, that should be near the top of drafts. And then one of the more interesting names will be, does Derrick Henry still have that same Derrick Henry inside of him as he piles up all of these touches over the past few years, because he is a fantasy force as well. So that's some of the names I think you'll see at the top of drafts. So
interesting, right? From a analyst perspective, and what the running back has become in terms of salary cap allocation and importance on a team, seemingly is different with the fantasy side of it because of why the amount of touches they get. Why are they so? Because they can get receptions as well as rushes. I mean, why are they so important on the fantasy side in comparison to maybe the game planning aspect of a real game?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I think a lot of people that are brand new to fantasy, their default answer of who they think would be drafted first is the quarterback.
Right.
But in fantasy football, you end up starting multiple running backs, and there are so few running backs that have consistent workloads. And so they get prioritized a lot in fantasy because, beyond a handful of players like the aforementioned Jonathan Taylor, Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon, those guys, you have a lot of committee backfields. And that's really become the norm in the NFL, is to see, 2 or 3 backs make an impact. You just talked about, teams are willing to move on instead of paying the big contract because they can form committee backfields with younger players or less expensive players. But in fantasy, it's just about scarcity. It's about how many of this elite player at this position exists, and in running backs, it's hard to find them.
Hey, Andy, Chris Brockman here. Let's talk about who we're staying away from and who are our sleepers. Who do we not want on our team, and then who can we get later in drafts that are going to help us win?
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the big names in terms of a breakout/sleeper candidate this year is Javonte Williams in Denver, because I heard the Rich Eisen with Justin Herbert discussion before I came on. Like that division has some flamethrowers in it now. You've got offenses that are going to put up big points. Russell Wilson arrives in Denver, and here's Javonte Williams at 22 years old with the whole world in front of him. Melvin Gordon is there for one more year, but every fantasy player wants to know when Javonte Williams is going to kind of take over. And so he's a big name that I think will be polarizing for fantasy football players. And then on the other side, I think they're really afraid to mess around with the wide receivers in Seattle. I think DK Metcalf, what a physical force he is. Tyler Lockett, he's been great for years, but here you have the departure of Russell Wilson. And I don't know if it's we place our trust in Geno Smith or Drew Lock is going to get it done for fantasy.
How are you guys monitoring and gauging the Deshaun Watson situation in Cleveland, and how that affects the rest of the Browns, because they do have some relevant fantasy players with like Nick Chubb and now Amari Cooper?
Yeah, no question. It's one of the hardest situations that we deal with, in the off season when you have these ambiguous suspension situations. Everybody's trying to get an edge in fantasy, so you'd love to see a situation where you can trust quarterback play in Cleveland. But right now, we're going into the year with the expectation that it's going to be Jacoby Brissett, and then trusting those running backs to get it done. And It's really hard to take a chance on Amari Cooper. It's hard to take a chance on David Bell, the rookie wide receiver, because you just don't know what that passing offense is going to look like. And right now it looks like it's going to be a mystery for a while.
Hey, Andy, TJ here. How you doing, man?
What's up?
So here's just something we don't really talk about a lot in terms of fantasy, but in my league in particular, the last few years, our fantasy champion has been decided by their defense. Our league, we reward defenses pretty nicely in terms of points. And I know one year when Jacksonville caught fire, I rode them to a championship. And then 2 years ago, the Patriots defense was extremely stingy, and the team that had them won the title in our league. So are there any defenses out there right now that you have your eye on to kind of be like, yo, look for them in fantasy? They could be sneaky good.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things that is so hard for fantasy players. And I think our general advice when it comes to like kickers and defense is if you're not spending your whole off season researching that position and they're the last players taken in drafts, you might not want to have them have a heavy proportion of your points because there's a little bit, defenses, there's so much turnover. You talked about Jacksonville. We've seen them in days gone by bounce back and forth, from dominating to all of a sudden being a wasted draft pick. It's some of the staples that at the top, Buffalo and Tampa and the Rams. The Chargers could be very sneaky this year, but, fantasy players probably don't spend a lot of their time focusing on defense, so you got to be careful with how much emphasis you give them in scoring.
All right, Andy, I got one more question. So, as you were talking with Ryan earlier, I'm in one of those dynasty leagues, and we do keepers in my league. We cycle through the keepers, so we kind of rotate every 3 years. We have a max on how long you can keep a guy. So I'm just gonna put it out there right now. I need you to help me pick my keepers. Essentially, I can keep two of this list I'm gonna give you: Cam Akers, Travis Etienne, Cortland Sutton, or Chris Godwin. We are a full PPR league, 1 point per reception, with 6 points for every touchdown.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm going to lock Cortland Sutton in there right now. I think in a keeper dynasty situation, we know wide receivers are they have more longevity, and so I think your opportunity there with Cortland Sutton having that season, that the Cooper Kupp-esque breakout type of year with Russell Wilson's a real possibility. And then I guess I'd have more confidence in Travis Etienne over Cam Akers. Coming off the Achilles, you got the workload late in the season. Didn't look great, but should be better this year. But I think Travis Etienne, you said a full PPR lead to catch a ton of passes. And so I think I'm going to lock those two guys in. It might be a bit of a shock with how good Chris Godwin has been. But I'm looking to win my league, not finish third or fourth, and I think Sutton might be that guy for you.
That is amazing. I wasn't even really considering him, but he was kind of my fourth go. But thank you. I was kind of leaning running back heavy. I was just going to go Akers and Etienne and then try to fill out the wide receiver throughout the draft. But Cortland Sutton could have a big year with Russell Wilson, I see. Okay, let's do it.
There you go, yeah.
Interesting. That's why we have people like
Andy
Andy Holloway.
Him on.
That's why we have people like Andy Holloway on, co-host of the Fantasy Footballers podcast. Before we get you out of here, Andy, and thank you so much. My interest has been piqued enough listening to these guys whenever I host the show that I think I may get into a league this year. I might.
But get your royalties on those last place trophies too, though.
I should.
Yeah, right.
I should. Yeah. There's some pretty funny ones out there.
Andy, one more. Like, who's the quarterback that's gonna have the Joe Burrow type breakout this year? We all know like Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady and Justin Herbert. Those guys are gonna be the first kind of quarterbacks probably taken in most drafts. But who's gonna have that Burrow type leap this season? You think?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think the name that my co-host would appreciate me mentioning is Trey Lance in San Francisco, because even if he is not a world beater by NFL standards, in fantasy when you run the football, it's a cheat code. And Trey Lance is going to run the ball a ton. And so he's that player that sits later in drafts that has the highest upside to do that, to have that breakout system, all the confidence we have in Kyle Shanahan. I don't know if Trey Lance is going to be the passer everybody wants him to be this year, but it might not matter for fantasy.
What about Jalen Hurts? I'm scouring lists and rankings heading in. I mean, I see him in the top 5 in a lot of people, ahead of Tom Brady, ahead of Aaron Rodgers. What could Jalen Hurts do this year? You mentioned the rushing with Trey Lance. He certainly adds that element too.
Yeah, that's the secret weapon for Jalen Hurts, and I think people are willing to move him up this year in the rankings because of the addition of A.J. Brown, because Devontae Smith coming into year 2, and Hurts has the ability to do a lot for your fantasy team, even if he's, only throwing a couple of touchdowns in a game. So I think people are really excited about what he can do. I mean, you look at the top of draft boards, you see rushing quarterbacks, you see Kyler Murray, you see Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen. These are guys that have that ability to give you a baseline and not bury you if they don't, throw 2 or 3 touchdowns in a game.
Well, before I let you go here, Andy, you are doing something pretty cool, and you're releasing a children's book here soon called The Football Family. And my wife and I were talking last night about what fall means to us, what kind of things we like to do in the fall. And my son is starting to be old enough now where football is becoming a part of the fall for him, and understanding that. What's this book about, and how, tell everybody how they can get it and start something like this with their family when your kids are young.
Yeah, I think that's always, it was born out of what our show is all about, which is, we believe that fantasy football, NFL fandom, all of those things it's a family affair. I've got 3 kids, and I've seen them grow up, and just started to get involved in fantasy football and being fans of we're Cardinals fans out here. And so I wanted to make something that kind of captured that story of how the family can get, whether you're rooting for the same side or not, and how it brings people together. And so that's what I did. It's called My Football Family. You can find it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or anywhere you get books. And it'll be coming out the end of the month. And I think anybody that has kids or knows kids that are, into sports, or you want to get started on that journey, is going to be a fun book for them. Yeah,
I'm looking forward to it. I'm gonna be looking for that to start reading it with my boy. He loves reading books before bed, so I think that would be a good nighttime for this fall. Andy, thanks for taking the time today. You've been very informative, and we've had a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Andy Holloway, everybody, the Fantasy Footballers Podcast.